I've been bullet journaling since 2017, and my journal has been through many iterations, has seen many different types of spreads, but the one thing I haven't done in my journal is use the OG method created by Ryder Carol, who founded the whole bullet journal system. But I finally recently read his book, The Bullet Journal Method, and even as someone who's been journaling for several years, there was still so many great takeaways in this and so many new things that I want to apply. So let's dive right into the book, and to put everything I'm about to say into context, the book is divided up into 4 main sections. So we have the first part, which is basically just why you should try bullet journaling. The second part, which goes over the actual systems, so Ryder Carroll's spreads and how he uses them. Part 3 is kind of a philosophical discussion of a lot of broader topics related to productivity and journaling and planning. And then the last main section is all about customization, so basically how to make the journal your own. And in case you're super new to bullet journaling, simply put, bullet journaling is basically an analog and planner system. All you need is a blank dot grid notebook and a pencil. And the beauty of it is that you get to then decide how you want to lay out your monthly calendar or daily to-do list or whatever you're using the journal for. So one of the overarching takeaways for me, which is mentioned right off the bat in the first section, is that one of the most important components of bullet journaling is bringing in mindfulness and intentionality into our planning. Mindfulness is basically just being more aware of the present moment, and that can include throughout the day just being more aware of what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Do I want to be doing this? So when we're talking about planning, mindfulness can result in more intentionality. And that means instead of just going through our day on autopilot and kind of reacting to life, we're pausing and intentionally choosing each step forward. Without mindfulness, we tend to just kind of follow the path of least resistance, but that doesn't always match up with our larger values or bigger goals. So bringing mindfulness into planning can be really powerful. So a few specific ways I'm going to apply this to my journaling, and maybe this might be some helpful ideas for you guys too. But the first one is I'm going to be more selective of what I write down in my journal. And this is a point that Ryder Carol brings up multiple times throughout the book. I don't know if anybody can relate to this, but I definitely have a problem of having never-ending to-do lists, and I feel like I almost never complete all the tasks I write down on my daily to-do list, on my weekly to-do list, monthly to-do list, on and on and on. So I really want to take a step back, and anytime I write a task down, make sure that it's meaningful and it's important, and get better at prioritizing. And I think if I have less tasks written down overall, but the tasks that are listed are meaningful and important, that will result in more productivity, because Ryder Carol makes the point several times that being productive isn't about being busy and doing more, but it's about doing well and prioritizing the things that really matter. I wanted to mention the other biggest light bulb moment for me from this first section of the book, and it's the idea of decision fatigue and how that can lead to us being busy but not productive, which, like I mentioned earlier, those are not the same things. So there's this great quote from the book, and it goes, "No matter how rational and high-minded you try to be, you can't make decision after decision without paying a biological price. It's different from ordinary physical fatigue. You're not consciously aware of being tired, but you're low on mental energy. This state is known as decision fatigue." So the moral of the story is that if we can reduce the number of decisions we're making, we'll have more focus and energy for the things that matter most. And I love the examples that Ryder Carol gave to illustrate this. There's another quote from President Obama who said, "You'll see I only wear gray or blue suits. I'm trying to pare down decisions. I don't want to make decisions about what I'm eating or wearing because I have too many other decisions to make. And then there's also a story from Warren Buffett, who told an employee to write down his top 25 career goals and then circle the top 5. And then he gave the advice to the employee to avoid the other 20 that he didn't circle at all costs and only work on those top 5 because he will achieve those faster and better if he let go of everything else. So how I want to apply this to my journaling, like a lot of people, I think I use my journal for lots of trackers and using it to guide big projects and goals, but I want to change some of my layouts to where I'm focusing on as few things as possible. So for example, I used to track about 5 to 6 habits a month, but for these past few months, I've replaced that tracker spread with a sleep log because I decided that sleep was the most important of all of those habits to me right now. So instead of keeping track of a lot of different things and trying to improve on a lot of different habits, I'm really narrowing in on my sleep and using my log to make that a priority and get to see a lot more details and information on my sleep than I had room for when I was tracking a lot of other things as well. Okay, now let's get into some thoughts on specific spreads and journal layouts. Like I said, the second section of this book is going through all of Ryder Carroll's actual spreads and systems. So in case you're unfamiliar, I will just rapid fire take you through the original spreads. The bullet journal method starts with an index, which you fill in as you go once spreads are created. Next is the future log. So this is basically your annual calendar, or a lot of people do this in 6-month increments, and you can start this at any point. So if I was starting a new journal now, I might do a log for April through September. This is where you write tasks and events outside the current month. And then since this is a new spread we're creating, I would add this to my index. Next, you have your monthly log. This is his version of the monthly calendar, but instead it's in a log format. So you write the days of the month on the left, and then the space on the right is for your events or whatever else you track in your calendar. Next to the monthly log is your monthly task list, pretty self-explanatory, and that's it for the monthly setup. The last core collection is your daily logs, which in this method you start the date of. So on Monday, April 1st, because it works out really nicely that April 1st is a Monday this year, I would write my title, use my daily log for events and tasks and whatever else. And then Ryder Carol uses a system called rapid logging in the daily columns, which I'll talk more about in a little bit because that was another one of my big takeaways. But I would take as much space as I needed for Monday, and then on the next day, that's when I would create my header for Tuesday, and so on. So those are the core spreads of the bullet journal system, and as you can see, I just set up that journal in less than 5 minutes. So at its core, it's a very simple and minimal system. But again, if you want more detailed discussions on each of these spreads, definitely check out Ryder Carroll's book or his YouTube channel. I was first introduced to bullet journaling on Pinterest, and it was mainly fun little artistic spreads like tracking the TV shows I watch or doing a summer bucket list. And then I found Amanda Rach Lee on YouTube and was kind of introduced to the whole world of bullet journaling on YouTube and monthly plan with me's, and that's when I really started doing monthly calendars and setups in my journal. It's so cool how everybody does their journal so differently, but it was really interesting to me to come back to the origins because how Ryder Carroll uses his journal was very different in a lot of ways that I was used to seeing people bullet journal online and how I used my journal. The first thing that stood out to me that I knew I wanted to try in my journal was rapid logging. I think I talked about implementing this in my March setup. This is basically a system for your daily log to capture your life as it happens, so putting an emphasis on things happening in the present just as much as your plans for the future. So in addition to writing down tasks and your schedule, you can also record things like I got a call from my mom this afternoon and this is something important we talked about. Or I hit this milestone at work, or I PR'd on my 5K time in that evening's run. Anything that's significant or noteworthy to you. And I think that's really cool because it blends my bullet journal as a planner, but also incorporates some traditional journaling as well. And Ryder Carol encourages doing this in short form, so you're not like writing these long journal entries every day or throughout the day, but just little bullets that capture the importance of what you're trying to write down. So I've actually been rapid logging for a few weeks and a few amazing things have come out of it. First, I think it's really helped with managing expectations, because if I look back on my day and I only see the plan I made at the beginning of the day, a lot of times my day doesn't go exactly like what I wrote down. Maybe something took longer than I expected it to, or a new task came up that I worked on instead. Maybe my husband and I went on a date instead of grocery shopping and cooking that night. And all of that might be okay, but I'm going to feel better looking back on that day if I see the tasks that I did complete and the things that did happen, instead of just looking at my list that didn't actually occur or that didn't get done. And then of course with migration, anything that is important or vital, I can take with me into the next day. The last main thing that I love about rapid logging so far is that it really creates this great record of your days, of your life, and that really helps with reflection. So how to reflect better is one of my other big takeaways when we get into the next section of the book. But one point that Ryder Carol brings up is that our memories aren't always completely accurate. So if I'm just looking back on last week in my head, my perception of how the week went might be vastly different than how I perceive it when I go back and actually read what happened, what my thoughts were throughout each day, and see a real record of the week. The other thing I want to try from these original spread layouts is the monthly log, which you guys know if you saw my April setup video, because I switched to the monthly log in that setup. This is a little uncomfortable for me because I like being able to visualize the month with the calendar, but Ryder Carol's system is all about efficiency and ease of the setup, and I have to say setting up that log was a lot easier than drawing out the whole calendar. But aside from the layout being very different, again, there's that emphasis of recording in the present instead of just using it to plan for the future. So of course at the beginning of the month, I'll put in all of my set events and travel and appointments and things like that. But then I also might go back and add, watched the new Dune movie with my friends this weekend, or went on a hike that morning, and things that happened that weren't planned so far in advance to where I had written them beforehand on the calendar, which feels very relaxed because I don't know if anybody else does this, but sometimes I beat myself up if I write an event down that happened after the event's over, because I'm thinking like, this is a calendar, it's supposed to be for planning and for keeping on top of upcoming things, and you're not using it right if you're writing down things after the fact. But Ryder Carol's approach really challenges that and makes me feel a little better about recording things later or just having a more flexible approach. A big takeaway of the book was the importance of reflection and how to include it regularly, because this is a huge part of how we can be intentional and mindful in our journals. So a few thoughts from my own experience with reflection, because this is something I've been including in my journal long before I read this book. But first, I think it's so important to actually enact change. I don't know if I've ever been more called out than this one post I saw on Instagram a long time ago, but it stuck with me. And it went something like expecting to achieve my goals when they require me to show a sense of skill and discipline I've never before shown in my life. And I think a lot of people, myself included, fall into the trap of trying for the same goals or the same new habits over and over again without changing anything from our past failures. Kind of like, what's that quote from Voltaire, I think, that says, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting a different result. So like if I have this goal to drink this amount of water and day after day I fall short of that goal, me being like, okay, tomorrow's the day, I'm gonna do it this time, probably isn't going to do anything. In order to actually build this new habit, I need to reflect on what was going wrong in the first place and brainstorm solutions to those real barriers that were preventing me from drinking enough water each day. And reflection is also about celebrating your wins and intentionally continuing with the things that are going well. And I think we can learn a lot, probably just as much, if not more, from reflecting on the things we're doing well, because we can start to analyze, why is this going so well, and maybe how can I apply those same things to other habits I want to work on. The second big advantage with reflection is being more aware of your why and the meaning behind your goals and actions. So with decreasing the amount of tasks I write down, that starts with reflection and being aware of my priorities and what's most important. So I do already incorporate monthly reflections in my journal, and I feel like for me personally, that's really my sweet spot for where I can most efficiently reflect. But Ryder Carol also suggests a very quick AM and PM reflection. So I might start trying that. And I also really did like his tip to where you can assign the time between your PM reflection and your AM reflection the next morning as your unplugged time. Okay, the last takeaway before we get into some final thoughts from the last section in the book. I really loved the chapters on small steps and goals, and specifically the method of sprints. In the discussion of goals, Ryder Carol talks about the importance of breaking down big goals into small steps, not only for going about it in a more organized way, but it helps in several other ways as well. So for example, right now I am actually starting to work on opening my own Etsy shop, and an example of a sprint I could write down in my bullet journal would be to design the art pieces for the launch inventory. Ideally, each sprint is designed to take less than a month and there's no barriers to entry. So if I still needed to decide on my launch inventory or needed to buy some art supplies, I would want to make a sprint to complete those items first. So I would really zone in on this sub-goal for the specified period of time. Maybe it's a full month, maybe it's just 2 weeks. And that really takes away a lot of the overwhelm that comes with bigger or more complicated goals. And it also decreases decision fatigue. I'm not wondering, oh, what should I do next? What task should I prioritize next on this goal? Ryder also says that setting sprints and completing them is very important for the endurance of motivation, because when I complete that sprint, I completed a whole sub-goal, and that success and the feeling of success is going to be a huge motivator in continuing to work on the next steps in the goal. Okay, let's touch on the last main section of the book, which is all about customization. Of course, my journal is already pretty customized to me, but I really liked how Ryder approached custom collections, so I definitely want to start implementing more of those and put an emphasis on doing so more casually. Ryder Carol's original system is really all about function, but if you've seen my journal, and of course a lot of the journals people share online, a lot of us also add art and design to the spreads, which I love. That's one of my favorite things about bullet journaling, is that it's a built-in way to draw and include creativity in my daily and weekly and monthly routines. But that does tend to put a little extra pressure on the journal. So if I say wanted to just create a sprint for creating the launch inventory for my art shop, I feel this pressure to think about beforehand, like, okay, well, how am I going to design it? What colors am I going to use? And that just adds a lot of barriers to creating custom spreads. So a new mindset I kind of want to implement is if I determine there is a custom collection I want to create for a project I'm working on, I'm just going to create it first and focus on the function, make sure I can organize the spread well and have enough space. And after that's all done, then I'll go back and decorate it if I want to, but I also want to put no pressure on myself to decorate every spread from now on. I also want to start using threading so that I don't have to worry so much about where things are in my journal. Threading is Ryder's method to connect related spreads on the spreads themselves and in the index. So if I create a custom spread for a sprint for my art shop goal, and then I turn the page and I start my next weekly spread, but then when I'm using that previous sprint spread, I run out of space, I can then just turn to that next page after my weekly spread and continue writing down the tasks from the sprint there, and then use threading to keep it organized so I still know where everything is. On that first spread of the sprint, I would then write at the bottom like continued on page 72, and then on the second page of that sprint I could write continued from page 64. Going back to the index, I would use that same line that I used to record the original sprint and just write down that it was on both pages 64 and 72. And this creates a lot more flexibility when trying to decide how to lay out your journal and where to put spreads, because sometimes you just don't know how much space things are gonna take. And those were my biggest takeaways after reading the bullet journal method, after bullet journaling myself for 7 years. I hope you guys found this helpful and maybe even got some ideas for your own journal. Be sure to follow along in my plan with me's if you want to see how incorporating all these changes goes in my journal. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you again soon.